Communists continued their artillery and rocket attacks on Da Nang.
In Saigon today, President Thieu announced a new crackdown on drug traffic in Vietnam. The emergency legislation would make dealing in narcotics a wartime crime. It would order the death penalty for importers and peddlers who work for organized drug rings.
In 1971, Michael Lavine, himself a military veteran, was working the streets of New York for drug cases when he stumbled into a case that almost led him to the very top of the food chain in the Asian heroin business, until the CIA stepped in.
I get out to JFK and I'm told this guy is a ex-GI from Vietnam who his passport says he made 7 trips from Bangkok in the last, year or something like that. Yeah. They've got 3 kilos of pure heroin. You can make a couple of million on that one suitcase. And he tells me, I had to flip him, that is, get him to talk, and I did. I said, can you introduce me to your source in Bangkok? He said, well, I have to take a photo, you and me, cut it in half, and I have to contact them and see if they'll deal with you. But they were producing hundreds of kilos a month or a week, and that was in Chiang Mai, yeah. They called it the factory. They write back to Davidson, to this P.O. box that we had, undercover P.O. box, and says, tell him come.
It all started with the seizure of a kilo of pure China white at John F. Kennedy Airport in Queens, New York. Lavine and his informant developed the cover story that Lavine represented a combine of high-level U.S. mafia buyers looking to purchase hundreds of kilos of heroin at a time.
Get to Bangkok. Chinese guys are waiting for me, 2 Chinese drug dealers, and we begin to hang out. These guys like me so much that they're convinced that I deal with the mafia in America and I can do hundreds of kilos, not 2 or 3 at a time. I convinced them. So they invite me to the factory. Because they want you to meet my uncle, they want you to come to Chiang Mai. And in the meantime, I'm hanging with these guys, they're whining and dining me, they're taking me here, they're taking me to massage parlors, they're taking me everywhere, these guys love me. Next thing I know, I'm not getting money. I don't even have money to continue paying my hotel bill. I'm called in. In the embassy, I meet my first CIA guy that I had ever met in my life. I had no experience with them. And this guy was like also out of a movie. He was wearing these, those little combat jackets and shit, bush jackets, and he was like totally duded out. I learned a great expression. Heaven protect us from men who live the illusion of danger. And this was like one of these guys, if you get the real CIA work as compared to what movies put out, you just like, it's a joke. Fraternity boys with guns and no honor. This guy's telling me, you're not going to Chiang Mai. And I couldn't understand why. I said, they want to take me to where they're producing the heroin. I thought I was about to make the biggest case ever of heroin, which might well have been, I don't know. He said, look, Lavine, you're military, you're a good soldier, we know your record, you gotta take it from me that you don't know the whole picture. He said, I want you to wrap this up now. I want you to, get the delivery of whatever you can get from these guys, bust them, bust whoever you know here, and that's it. And just take it from me, you don't know the whole picture.
So why would the CIA have stepped in to block Michael Lavine's penetration of heroin manufacturing in Chiang Mai, Thailand? Probably because our closest allies and proxies in the Vietnam War were growing opium and selling heroin not only around the world, but to American soldiers fighting in Vietnam.
Every man leaving South Vietnam now is tested for heroin addiction. These GIs have completed their Vietnam tours and are getting ready to go home. But before they can leave here, they'll have to submit urine samples to show whether they've been using heroin.
Why do you feel the tests aren't very accurate? Well, from what I've read so far, it only proves to be, say that 5% of the GIs over here are using them, but you look around, the problem's a little bit bigger than that.
Coming on the heels of near defeat in the Korean War, the United States was deeply concerned about the expansion of Soviet and Chinese influence in Asia. The tiny kingdom of Laos became the center of America's secret war on communism in East Asia. President Eisenhower supplied the Laotian military with cash and weapons, and the CIA conducted intelligence operations from inside Laos. The Hmong were a small ethnic group living in a remote area of Laos, where the North Vietnamese were moving troops and equipment in to attack South Vietnam. The Hmong were really turned into the CIA's private army in Laos, and the Hmong's main source of income was growing opium. In 1965, the new Laotian government kicked all the Corsicans out of Laos, and the Corsicans had been the ones purchasing the opium grown by the Hmong and shipping it out to be processed into heroin. 1965 was also the year that the United States sent its first actual American soldiers to fight in Vietnam, and the war started to heat up. So the Hmong tribes became very important to the Vietnamese war effort.
The man who commands most of the secret army is General Bang Pao. He is a Hmong tribesman who worked closely with the CIA in organizing the Hill people. Today, along with his secret army role, he also commands all Lao forces in the most crucial military region. Frequently, he is accompanied by an aide-de-camp with a briefcase full of money. Bang Pao and his men received their money direct from the CIA. The Hmong are a tough and stoic race, and as long as Bang Pao is willing to lead, they seem willing to follow.
According to Dr. Alfred McCoy's research, it was the three leading democratic political parties of the South Vietnamese government selling all the drugs. And guess who was transporting the raw opium from Laos into Thailand for processing into heroin? The CIA.
A narcotics researcher testified today that Indochina's heroin traffic is tied directly to South Vietnamese leaders and to foreign gangsters. Alfred W. McCoy, a Yale graduate student, told a Senate subcommittee that South Vietnam's heroin and opium traffic is divided between the political organizations of President Thieu, former Vice President Nguyen Cao Ky, and Premier Tran Tien Kim. In fact, said McCoy, Ky's sister buys heroin in Laos, has it shipped to Cambodia, where it's picked up and flown to Saigon by planes of the Vietnamese 5th Air Division. McCoy said military leaders throughout Southeast Asia are mixed up in the illegal drug traffic, including some who work for the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. McCoy also testified that the Florida-based mafia family of Santo Trafficante Jr. and Corsican gangsters are deeply involved. What's more, he said, U.S. diplomats and intelligence agents know what's going on but aren't doing much about it. The State Department denied McCoy's accusations and said many of them had been made before.
With the Corsican pilot shut down, the CIA stepped in and provided transport for the Hmong opium crop. And the Hmong military leader, Vang Pao, actually started manufacturing heroin himself, and the chief of staff of the Laotian army was suspected of operating the largest heroin refinery in the entire world.
General Zhu, the American people have been told that you are an important man in the drug traffic in South Vietnam. Is this true?
It is not true. I deny completely that. I don't know about that. Since I'm a child, and until now, I don't know about it.
Have you ever had any connection at all with drug operations in Vietnam or Asia?
Not at all.
Top intelligence sources in Saigon have provided hard intelligence, quote unquote, deeply implicating General Zhu as one of the chief heroin traffickers in South Vietnam. I stand on that information. That documentation is in South Vietnam. But the point is that this information has been known now for 3 months, and no action has been taken on it. It's time to move. Either we're going to move against heroin in South Vietnam, or we're not going to move against heroin in South Vietnam.
In January of 1973, peace accords in Paris were signed between Vietnam and the United States. U.S. troop withdrawals began immediately.
These are tonight's headlines. South Vietnam surrenders and the communists occupy Saigon. We have dramatic film of the evacuation of Americans and Vietnamese from Saigon.
With the war ending, the CIA trimmed down its operations in Southeast Asia, and the heroin supply in the U.S. immediately tightened. Between 72 and 73, heroin use rapidly declined by a third, while American troop levels in Vietnam declined by 90%.
Very sharp recent increases in the prices of heroin throughout the eastern United States indicate that the supply is drying up and that the pressure is on the criminal drug trade.
The decrease in heroin on the East Coast had a rapid effect. Not only did overdose deaths decrease, but crime rates dropped fast.
In New York, crime has dropped 18%, and the kind of crime that has dropped most dramatically is the kind that New York is known for: robbery, muggings, and purse snatching. But there is some other surprising information having to do with drug addiction that might be the real key to the 18% drop. There are 41% fewer people arrested who admit to heroin use last year than in 1971.
These are shockingly large drops in crime and show just how destructive the flood of heroin, facilitated by the CIA, had been to the social fabric of America. Now that the political reasons for protecting heroin dealers were going away, law enforcement was able to disrupt the business in a major way.
A year ago, a new drug law went into effect in New York State. Nelson Rockefeller, who as governor pushed his drug law bill through the legislature, said the mounting drug problem had to be brought under control with tough new weapons.
The law was intended to scare the dealer out of business. Under it, a pusher can receive a life sentence with little chance to plea bargain. And if he ever gets out of the penitentiary, he faces parole supervision for life.
Was it a coincidence that the heroin supply crashed right as the Vietnam War ended? No way. Evil thrives in times of chaos. Vietnam and heroin went together like a hand and glove. Vietnam wasn't the first war that fueled America's drug problem. Lucky Luciano and the Mafia were given the keys to the kingdom of opium by the U.S. government, and their Corsican partners had the same sort of deal with the French government. First, it was in exchange for help in World War II. Then it was for help fighting the average working man in Western Europe that supported any sort of labor movement that resisted total unfettered capitalism under the guise of fighting communism. While back at home, Richard Nixon was building up the criminal justice system and launching the war on drugs.
We've turned the corner on drug addiction in the United States. Drug addiction in the United States is under control.
A year ago, a new drug law went into effect in New York State. Nelson Rockefeller, who as governor pushed his drug law bill through the legislature, said the mounting drug problem had to be brought under control with tough new weapons.
The law was intended to scare the dealer out of business. Under it, a pusher can receive a life sentence with little chance to plea bargain. And if he ever gets out of the penitentiary, he faces parole supervision for life.
As of 2017, more Americans are dying from drug overdoses than ever. Most of them from opiates.
Heroin deaths continue to climb.
After studying the connection between heroin and the Cold War, I'm left to ask this question. Is it a coincidence that heroin availability has skyrocketed since the American invasion of Afghanistan, which has overtaken the Golden Triangle as the opium growing capital of the world?